The scorching Arizona desert sun painted the ruins of Redemption Gulch in shades of gold and dust. The wind howled through the empty windows of the saloon and the old general store, singing a melancholic tune of forgotten times. Caleb Cobra. Montgomery rode alone, his hat pulled low, shielding his eyes from the relentless glare. He was no longer the feared man he once was, the legendary gunslinger who, with his gang, had spread terror throughout the West. Now the scars on his soul weighed heavier than the bullets in his holster. The disastrous escape from a train robbery in Blackwood Creek had been the breaking point. That last job was supposed to be his retirement, his ticket to a new life, but something went wrong, terribly wrong. Shots echoed, screams tore through the air, and when the smoke cleared, the cruel reality set in. His most loyal friend, Silas, Shadow Blackwood, was dead, and the rest of the gang had scattered, taking with them the loyalty and camaraderie Caleb valued so much. That day, Caleb not only lost a friend, but also a piece of his own soul. The image of Silas's pale, lifeless face haunted his dreams, turning nights into a torment of remorse. He chose Redemption Gulch to hide, an ironic name for the personal hell he carried. It was there, in that ghost town, that he hoped to find some kind of peace, or perhaps just wait for the end he believed he deserved. His days were filled with memories of mistakes, of the lives he ruined, and the feeling that every step he took moved him further away from any redemption. Loneliness was a constant companion, but it was self-imposed loneliness, a silent penance. The weight of the empty holster at his waist was a constant reminder that one day that Cobra would have to face the consequences of his venomous bites. Amidst the oppressive silence of Redemption Gulch, a detail caught Caleb's attention. A subtle wisp of smoke rose from the chimney of a small cabin on the outskirts of town, the only structure that seemed to defy the abandonment. Someone was there, a remnant of life in a sea of death. Curiosity, long dormant, awakened in him, mixed with a pang of apprehension. Who would be foolish or brave enough to inhabit that forgotten place? He knew that no matter how hard he tried to run, the past always found a way to catch up to him. The smoke led Caleb to the cabin of Elara Vance, a woman of impressive resilience whose eyes, despite evident pain, gleamed with unwavering determination. She was the widow of a modest farmer, a victim of a sudden fever that had swept through the region, leaving her alone with arid land and an uncertain future. Her presence in Redemption Gulch was as unexpected as Caleb's, and at first, they both regarded each other with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Caleb introduced himself as a tired traveler, avoiding any mention of his notorious past. Elara, in turn, showed understandable caution, but her need for help was palpable. Her small corn crop, her only sustenance, was dying under the merciless sun, and the town's main well had dried up. Caleb, surprisingly, offered to help. The hands that once skillfully wielded pistols now worked the land, repaired the old windmill, and deepened the well. It was hard work, but every drop of sweat seemed to wash away some of the dirt from his soul. Elara watched him, realizing that beneath the rough exterior of a man, there was a reluctant kindness. As days turned into weeks, an improbable connection began to blossom between them. Caleb, accustomed to solitude and a wandering life, found solace in Elara's quiet company. She, in turn, saw in him not the outlaw the stories told, but a man searching for something more, something she, in her own pain, could understand. Shared simple meals at sunset, and Caleb, for the first time in years, felt a glimpse of peace. He helped her irrigate the crops, fix the cabin roof, and gradually, the barriers between them crumbled. However, the shadow of Caleb's past was a constant threat. One starry night, as they talked about their lives, Elara noticed the scar on his shoulder, the result of an old gunshot. "Were you a soldier?" she asked, her voice soft. Caleb hesitated, the words of his past caught in his throat. "Something like that," he replied, looking away. The omission weighed on his conscience, but he couldn't risk revealing the truth and losing the only good thing he had found in years. The peace of Redemption Gulch was brutally interrupted when Dusty the Water Snake Hayes, one of Caleb's former gang members, arrived in town. Dusty was a ruthless man, driven by greed and a thirst for revenge. He blamed Caleb for the failure of the Blackwood Creek robbery, and worse, for Silas's death. He had tracked Caleb to Redemption Gulch, and his arrival brought with it the imminent threat of violence and the return of the past Caleb was so desperately trying to bury. Dusty wasn't alone. 2 henchmen accompanied him, men as cruel as he was, their faces marked by the hard life of the Old West. The air of Redemption Gulch, once calm, was now charged with tension and danger. The arrival of Dusty Hayes and his henchmen cast a chilling shadow over Redemption Gulch. This was no longer Caleb and Elara's private paradise. It was a stage for a reckoning. Dusty, a tall, slender man with a cynical smile that barely hid the cruelty in his eyes, wasted no time. He stood in the middle of the main street, dust rising in clouds around his boots, and yelled Caleb's name, his voice echoing through the empty walls of the buildings. "Cobra, I know you're here. You can't hide forever." Caleb felt a shiver run down his spine. His fear wasn't for himself, but for Elara. He hurried to the cabin, finding her with a panicked expression on her face. "Who is he, Caleb?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's the past, Elara. A past I wished I could have left to die," he replied, his voice choked with guilt. He quickly explained that Dusty was an old member of his gang, a dangerous man who blamed him for Silas's death. The revelation hit Elara like lightning. The gentle man who helped her on the farm was, in fact, a wanted gunslinger. Shock and disappointment were etched in her eyes, a pain more acute than any bullet could inflict on Caleb. Despite the revelation, Elara didn't abandon him. Instead, she displayed surprising courage. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared, her voice firm. "We're facing this together." Her words, though brave, didn't lessen the tension. Caleb knew Elara's presence made her a target, and he felt increasingly cornered. He tried to convince her to flee, to seek safety in the nearest town, but she refused. This was her home, and she wouldn't abandon it, nor him. The confrontation was inevitable. Dusty and his impatient men invaded Elara's property. The tension in the air was palpable, sharp as a blade. "So the Cobra finally shows his face," Dusty sneered, his gaze fixed on Caleb. "I've come to collect what you owe me, Montgomery. For Silas's death, for the gold we lost, and for your cowardice." Elara positioned herself slightly in front of Caleb, an act of defiance that surprised everyone, including Dusty. "He's not what you think," she cried out, her voice echoing with unexpected strength. However, before the situation could escalate into a shootout, an unexpected sound broke the tense silence, the dry, weak cough of an old man coming from inside Elara's cabin. Caleb and Dusty exchanged confused glances. Elara paled. "Grandpa Ben," she whispered, and ran inside the cabin. Dusty, suspicious, followed her, and Caleb, feeling a pang of apprehension, did the same. Inside the cabin, on a modest bed, lay an elderly man, thin and pale, his face wrinkled with age and illness. His eyes, however, were a piercing blue, full of deep sadness. He was Benjamin Ben Carter, Elara's grandfather, whom she had hidden there, caring for him in his last days of life. But what shocked Caleb to the core were the words that came from the old man's lips in a hoarse, urgent whisper. "Silas ... He didn't die that day, Caleb. It was ... It was Dusty ... He shot him in the back to steal the gold and frame you." The revelation was a seismic shock. Old Ben's words were not just an accusation. They were the truth Caleb unconsciously sought, the final piece of a puzzle that tormented him. Dusty Hayes froze, his face contorted in a mix of fury and despair. The silence that followed was broken only by the howling wind outside, carrying with it the weight of unthinkable betrayal. The truth was far darker than Caleb ever imagined, and this revelation changed everything. Grandpa Ben's revelation hit Caleb like a lightning bolt. Fury bubbled in his chest, a toxic mix of rage at Dusty's betrayal and shame for having been so blind. He turned to Dusty, his eyes flashing. "You framed me, you bastard. Why would you do such a thing?" Dusty, caught red-handed, tried to stammer out an excuse, but the words caught in his throat revealed his guilt. His two henchmen, previously so confident, now exchanged nervous glances. The truth had been spoken, and the air in the cabin was heavy with the weight of betrayal and revelation. Elara, shocked and relieved to have the truth revealed, placed her hand on Caleb's arm, a silent gesture of support. Her presence, despite her own pain, was a beacon in the darkness. "He's telling the truth, Caleb. I know him. I can see the lie in his eyes," she said, her voice soft but firm. That moment was a turning point for Caleb. Rage consumed him, but Elara's pain and Grandpa Ben's fragility reminded him that violence wasn't the only answer. Caleb stepped away from Dusty, who now cowered under their gazes. He knelt beside Grandpa Ben, who was coughing weakly. "Why didn't you tell me before, Ben?" Caleb asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. The old man, with tremendous effort, managed to whisper, "I was scared." Dusty threatened Elara. The old man's words were the last straw. Caleb felt a mix of guilt and determination. He had spent years running, carrying a burden that wasn't his. Now the truth was liberating, but also dangerous. He stood up, his eyes fixed on Dusty. "Your chance to run is over, Dusty. This is the time to settle accounts," Caleb declared, his voice calm but loaded with an authority he hadn't used in a long time. Caleb's courage didn't come from a desire for revenge, but from a new priority, protecting Elara and Grandpa Ben. He knew he had to face his past head-on, to secure a future for them. The small cabin became a stage for decisions that would change everyone's course. Caleb, now with the truth as his guide, offered Dusty and his henchmen one last chance. Leave, now, and never come back. Dusty's henchmen, realizing the tide had turned, began to retreat, their faces pale with fear. Dusty, however, refused to accept defeat. His hatred and guilt were so great that they blinded him to logic. "I don't run from anyone, Cobra. Let's finish this now," he snarled, pulling his gun. Caleb knew the final confrontation was inevitable. But he was no longer alone. Elara's silent strength, Grandpa Ben's hard-won wisdom, and the liberation of the truth transformed him. The repentant gunslinger no longer sought escape, but genuine redemption. He was ready to fight not for himself, but for the people who, somehow, had found a way into his hardened heart. The air in Elara's cabin grew thick with imminent threat. Dusty Hayes, gun in hand, looked like a cornered animal, his eyes filled with hatred and despair. His henchmen, however, had already retreated to the door, sensing the danger. Caleb, on the other hand, was strangely calm. He didn't draw his gun. Instead, his eyes fixed on Dusty's, a silent determination shining in them. "You won't frame me again, Dusty," Caleb said, his voice low and firm, with an authority that made Dusty hesitate for an instant. "The truth is out, and I won't let you hurt anyone else." Dusty, feeling the pressure of the moment and the implicit desertion of his men, reacted impulsively. He fired, the bullet ricocheting off the wooden wall near Caleb's head. The sound echoed in the small cabin, making Elara scream and Grandpa Ben cough convulsively. In a blink of an eye, Caleb acted. Not with a gun, but with the agility and strength of his gunslinging days. He lunged forward, disarming Dusty with a quick, precise blow. The gun fell to the floor with a thud, and Caleb immobilized him, his knee on Dusty's back, while holding his arms tightly. Dusty struggled, cursing, but Caleb was stronger, driven by a new form of determination. Dusty's henchmen, seeing their leader subdued and realizing the situation was out of control, ran out of the cabin, disappearing into the dust of Redemption Gulch. The confrontation was now just between Caleb and Dusty. Caleb lifted Dusty, forcing him to look at Elara and the dying Grandpa Ben. "Look at them, Dusty. Look at the pain you caused, at the lives you destroyed with your lies and your greed." He tightened his grip on Dusty's arm. "Silas was my friend. I trusted you. And you betrayed him. You betrayed me." Caleb's words hit Dusty harder than any punch. The image of Silas, whom he had betrayed, seemed to haunt him. Dusty's face, once contorted in anger, began to crumble, giving way to an expression of despair and, perhaps even remorse. He realized there was no escape, that his actions had finally caught up to him. Elara, seeing the scene, felt a mix of dread and relief. She approached, her voice soft but firm. "Justice will be served, Dusty. You'll have to answer for what you've done." In this climactic moment, the tension was palpable. Caleb had Dusty at his mercy. He could have ended everything right there, with his own hands, giving into the revenge that had haunted him for so long. But looking at Elara, at the purity of her spirit, and at Grandpa Ben, who now slept peacefully, Caleb's anger transformed into something different, a determination. To seek genuine redemption, not through violence, but through justice. He was no longer the Cobra, the ruthless gunslinger. He was Caleb Montgomery, a man seeking a second chance. With Dusty Hayes immobilized, Caleb felt a paradoxical relief. It wasn't the relief of vengeance consummated, but that of responsibility finally taken. He wouldn't deliver Dusty to the mob, nor would he kill him there. That was no longer the path of the Cobra. "Grandpa Ben needs a doctor," Elara said, her voice still a little shaky, but with new strength. "And you, Dusty, are going to face the law, in a big town where your story will be heard." Caleb nodded. He untied Dusty but kept him under surveillance. Using a piece of sturdy rope he found in the cabin to tie his hands, there would be no escape. The journey would be long and dangerous, but it was the only way to ensure the truth came out and that Dusty paid for his crimes. In the following days, life in Redemption Gulch gained new purpose. Caleb, with Elara's help, prepared Grandpa Ben for the journey. The old man, though weak, seemed to have found new peace knowing the truth would be revealed. The small corn crop was harvested, and the cabin, which once seemed like a tomb for Elara's dreams, was now a symbol of hope. The farewell to Redemption Gulch was silent and solemn. Caleb and Elara, with Grandpa Ben in a makeshift wagon and Dusty tied alongside, departed. The dust rising behind them was no longer the dust of abandonment, but that of the journey toward justice. With each mile traveled, Caleb felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. Their conversations during the journey were about an uncertain future, but one filled with a tenuous promise. He told her about the dangers of the road, the few resources they had, but also about his determination to protect them. Upon arriving in the bustling town of Silver Creek, Caleb's reputation still preceded him, but in a different way. News of the repentant outlaw bringing a criminal to justice spread like wildfire. The sheriff of Silver Creek, an austere but fair man, was shocked by Caleb's story and especially by Grandpa Ben's weak but coherent testimony. Dusty Hayes was immediately arrested and a trial was set. Caleb's testimony, now no longer the criminal but the main accuser, and Grandpa Ben's revelation shocked everyone. Dusty's story of betrayal became a scandal in the West. Loose ends still remained. The truth about the Blackwood Creek robbery and Silas's death was finally uncovered, clearing Caleb's name, though the scars of his past could never be erased. The law of the West was unforgiving, and Dusty's forced confession, who initially tried to deny it, but crumbled under the weight of evidence and Grandpa Ben's testimony, led him to a severe sentence. Caleb, in turn, was no longer a fugitive, but a man free to forge his own destiny. The love between him and Elara, born amidst chaos, blossomed under the sun of justice. 2 years had passed since the dust settled in Silver Creek. The small farm on the outskirts of town, once neglected land, flourished under the care of Caleb Montgomery and Elara Vance. The corn grew tall and golden, and a small stream, channeled with Caleb's effort and ingenuity, ensured constant irrigation. The cabin, expanded and reinforced, had become a welcoming home, where laughter and the smell of fresh bread were common. Grandpa Ben, though still frail, had recovered surprisingly well. His presence was a constant reminder of the truth that had freed Caleb. He spent his days on the porch, telling old stories to the few neighbors who visited, and his words, full of wisdom and experience, were a treasure to Elara and Caleb. Justice for Silas Blackwood was served. Dusty Hayes was sentenced to a long term in a distant penitentiary, and his story served as a warning to others who might follow the path of betrayal and greed. Caleb was no longer the Cobra. He had completely abandoned his gunslinger past. His gun, once a symbol of fear, now lay stored in a chest, a silent reminder of the dark days left behind. He found his purpose in the land, in building a future with Elara, and in the quietness of an honest life. The redemption he sought in Redemption Gulch wasn't divine forgiveness, but rather the peace of mind that came from doing what was right. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, Caleb and Elara sat on the porch, watching the small stream shimmer under the fading light. Elara nestled into his arms. "You found what you were looking for, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice soft as the breeze. Caleb smiled, kissing her hair. "More than I ever imagined. I found a home, Elara, and myself." He looked at the horizon, at the lands he now called his own, at the woman beside him, and at the cabin where life flourished. The violence of the Old West still existed, but he had found his refuge, his own redemption, not in an escape, but in an act of courage, love, and sacrifice. The story of the repentant gunslinger echoed as a legend in Silver Creek, proof that even in the darkest souls, the light of hope and redemption can shine brighter than any shadow. The Old West was a place of legends, and Caleb Montgomery had become one of them, not for his gun skills, but for the strength of his heart in finding peace.